So today they're going to discuss championing diversity as a board, such an important topic. They're using a case study of the Latino Center, the Midlands board. And Albert's going to lead the conversation between board members who will discuss the value of having diversity on boards and how it has led to the Latino Center's success. Over to you, Albert.
Muchas gracias, Linda, and thank you, you and Bianca and all the team at the Greater Omaha Chamber for putting this amazing event together. Please bear with me, everyone. I'm under a lot of pressure. I have 3 of my 10 bosses in this conversation, so I'm going to do my best to represent the agency well and to represent their incredible work well. And I'd like to just kind of start off with a little bit of history on the Latino Center of the Midlands. As Linda mentioned, we're using the work that we do at the center kind of as a case study to talk about diversity and inclusion and the importance of that on boards. So the Latino Center of the Midlands will be 50 years old next year. We're a historic organization located in South Omaha, serving the primarily immigrant and Spanish-speaking population. Over the years, the Latino Center has adapted to meet the community's needs. Starting in the 70s, it was a cultural rebirth for the Latino community. At that time, kind of the mindset was forget about your culture, assimilate to American society, forget the language, forget all of the richness. And there were some forward-thinking folks that put the agency together to counter that and to preserve the culture and preserve language and to uplift an immigrant community. So over the course of history, the Latino Center was at one point a head start because of the importance of early childhood education. And I'll fast forward because we have a lot of rich discussion to have around diversity and inclusion, but the most current work that we're doing at the Latino Center is based around education to really uplift a population that can benefit from increased education. And we do that through our GED program, our citizenship program, and other adult programming. We have our Pathways to Success program, where we operate in 7 schools in 3 districts, and we help students who are not attending school on a regular basis. And what we have found is that the immigrant community faces some unique challenges. So kids are not skipping school because they rather be doing something else on their own. They're not attending school because they're at home caring for siblings. When siblings are sick, they're working long hours and not having enough energy to get up and go to school. So we found all these barriers, and what we do is we connect students with a staff member, a caring adult that serves kind of as a social worker, as a liaison between the school and the family and juvenile justice. And we, our heart's in this game, and we see tremendous growth once we're able to kind of problem solve for families and students and the school district. The last program area is family, community, and well-being, and that's kind of the 911 of the Latino community. That's a program area that now with COVID is really, really busy. We're moved everything online, and this is the program area where somebody would be able to access different resources through whether internally or through one of our partners around health, around housing, around food. And we work with a tremendous group of partners to accomplish this. This is not something that we take on all to ourselves, but we work very collaboratively with a number of agencies in order to get the work done. So our stake in the game is that we're a trusted voice for the Latino community. People seek us to better their lives, and we take it very serious. From an operations standpoint, to give you a little bit of a heads up of our growth over the past few years, we have had some accelerated growth over the last 3 years. We have turned the organization from a $700,000 a year annual budget to a $2.2 million a year organization. We've doubled the amount of staff. We have really grown. And, again, this has to do, it has to do with a combination of us working very closely with some of the community partners that we work with. On my screen, out of the 20 people or so that I can see a few partners. One of them is Gina Ponce at Bellevue University, and we adore the relationship that we have with her as an individual. And then also through her work through the different organizations that she represents. So shout out to Gina Ponce, te queremos mucho. So I shared a little bit about the Latino Center. I gave a shout out to one of our great supporters and friends. And cutting into the conversation, one of the things that we hope to do with this conversation, we were intentional about doing this more of a casual conversation with board members, as you would see in a board meeting, you know, in an executive committee meeting discussing a serious topic. We hope that everyone in here today is able to identify some of the barriers of why there isn't greater board diversity, and to be able to offer some ideas and solutions on how we can remedy that as a community. So I have the privilege of now introducing La Señora Dulce Sherman, our board chair, and I'll let her take it away.
Gracias, Albert, and hola to todos that are here today. I wanted to just first start with the first question that I heard recently on a board that I serve, and the question came from a board member saying, does diversity really matter on our board? I mean, really, why does it matter to have diversity on board? Building upon last year's presentation, if you attended the first year conference of code, it was presented during the morning session that boards are not very diverse right now. In fact, the study that was presented included all sectors, and about 14% of the members on boards were people of color, only 14%. And to me, that's a shame, because we're missing so much opportunity. So as we look at the Latino Center board right now, diversity is very important to us. Our current board consists of 50% female, and 60% is people of color, and 40% are white. So for us, shades of color does matter. It's important to us because we believe it adds value much more than beyond checking a diversity box check or meeting that diversity quota. I recently read an article that referred to cognitive diversity, and it really reminded me of what our board was talking about in terms of why our board works so well together. And here's kind of the concept about that. Not only do we improve cognitive and demographic diversity on our board, but we're recruiting racially, ethnically, and gender diverse board members because they enhance the diversity on two factors. We are adding professional backgrounds and skills and experiences within areas that help the strategic and operating needs of the Latino Center of the Midlands. That's something that's really important to us. And because we do that, and because we see that, I mean, I think about Aaron, who has a strong background in marketing. I think about Chris, who is a strong leader in the community and in diversity, myself in human resources, and other members in finance and different industries. All those are introducing new views at board members, perspectives, and approaches to how we solve our problems. So for us, it's the ability to share our views openly and authentically, because, I mean, before this call started today and yesterday, as we had our last final dry run, it's really allowing us to be authentic with each other, to be honest with each other, because my idea isn't the only idea in the room, but when we have a realm of people around us on the board, it makes us a great team. And I actually look forward to our meetings, because I haven't worked on a board like the Latino Center of the Midlands board before that gels so well together, because we are encouraging each other. And, you know, like Albert said, the history of the organization, we want to be part of the success of the organization. Our board is not one where we are compensated for our time, and it's because we're very passionate about what we believe in the community and helping others. So, you know, that gets to the point of serving on several boards where you may feel like a token, and you may be the only person of color on those boards. And yesterday I talked at a session where in many organizations, I was usually the only person of color sitting at the table. And one of the things that is really important to us is that we want to feel like you're adding value. So if someone is asking you to be part of the board, like Albert was the person to ask me, I wanted to really find out the value, and was my voice going to be heard at the table? So when you're unable to not be yourself, to be your authentic self, you're not going to maximize your talents. And we believe that that's something that we do as a board. One of the things that we really look at, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is that we introduced a talent matrix. And we formalized on what captures everything that a board member should be for the Latino Center. So is that skills? Is that an industry or a specific sector that we're trying to recruit? Is that race, ethnicity, or gender that we're trying to capitalize on? But we are also going to be the first, and we were saying this the other day, is that we're not perfect, and we're not afraid to say that. We're not afraid to say, hey, we're not 100% of where we need to be, but we own it, and then we go after it. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our next board member to talk about retention and ownership. Albert, do you have anything, or any of the board members, anything to add with respect to what I just mentioned as to why we are the great team that we are?
No, the only thing that I think I'd like to add, and this is, I'm glad that I get to see people on the other side of the screen. I've presented where I can't see anything, and it's very strange. So quick show of hands, who serves on a board right now? Awesome. And I guess I'm just trying to gauge, if it's, are we speaking to fellow board members, which is exciting because I wasn't sure who was going to show up in this group. So that helps us frame the context of the conversation, is knowing that a good portion of the group already serve on boards, and you're here because you want to make sure that your boards are as diverse and rich as possible. So that's, I'm glad to see that. But yeah, I think with Dr. Witt, would you be able, if we can talk a little bit about retention and ownership for new board members, and this idea, of creating a we mentality of a board being united?
Yeah, I mean, thanks. I would say, in addition to the folks who raise their hand to say if they're on a board, everybody out there has some connection to a board, be it the board of trustees at the university you went to, the university you work at, the organization that you work for, some volunteer work you do. So even if you're not directly connected with a board, I would say that you want to take the time to find out who's on the boards of organizations with which you may have some connection, and find out how people get on those boards, what do they do, all of those things, and also check it out to see if it really represents the diversity you'd like to see within that organization and the mission of the organization. So that would be the homework. That's bringing me back to my days as a professor. Give you all a little bit of homework to do some poking around of the boards that you have connections to, or organizations that you may revere across the community. When it comes to this idea of ownership, it really relates to something that Dulce was talking about in being your full and authentic self. If you're going to step into the space of being on a board, particularly a volunteer board, when we're talking about a nonprofit doing work in the community, that truly is a space where you're putting in your personal time. You're putting in your personal passion, your personal effort. Now, people may have a wide variety of reasons why they initially get interested in the board. They may get interested in the board because they feel like they're going to pad a resume. Hopefully it's more than that, but some people may think that way. Other folks may have a genuine interest in the work of the organization. Some people may feel like, well, I work for a big employer, and the person from our company or organization who was on the board has left. Somebody needs to fill a slot. I mean, there are lots of different ways in which people get to that space. But in order to have folks who really stay committed, people who bring the thunder, they bring their full selves to the table, you have to figure out ways to make sure that they feel like they're invested, that they have a level of ownership. And when we're talking about diversifying boards, when to be completely honest, when we think about Omaha, Nebraska, we think about boards across the country. In general, we're talking about spaces that are dominated by the white majority. Depending on the industry or the organization, it may even be dominated by white males. So when we're talking about people who would be outside of that, those parameters for whatever board it may be, and maybe there are some boards that are dominated by a particular group of color, and you may have a white person who comes in, but in general, when we're talking about people of color getting involved, we have to remember that most probably on a day-to-day basis, they may find themselves as the only or one of a very few. On a day-to-day basis within either their workplace or their community, they may be having to really in some cases suppress or alter who they are, offer up a version of themselves that is not their full and authentic self. So then when they're doing this in their free time, and you're wanting them to really put forth that passion, and in the case of a nonprofit, you're not paying them. You want to create a space where they feel they can offer up their full and authentic self, that they don't have to put a lot of energy into being somebody they're not, something that they're not. So we just have to keep that in mind, that we want to be able to have people come in and make those contributions. And I would say personally, coming on to the Latino Center board, it's a space that, as Dulce said, I look forward to those meetings, because it's a space where I learn a lot, because I'm engaging in spaces and work that isn't always, there's some overlap with what I do on a day-to-day, but also it's in a different space. It's doing different things. So I'm learning, but I'm also learning from my fellow board members who have different paths to get to that board, who have different lived experiences due to their age, their gender, their race, their, country of origin, state of origin, city of origin. All of these things, we have these different stories. And over the course of time of being there, I've been able to offer up different tidbits of who I am and different elements of who I am. And I don't feel like I have to present some version of myself. And I feel like I'm in a space where other people aren't presenting to me versions of themselves. And that's powerful. And a lot of times we don't, it sounds simple, but we haven't taken the time to really think about that, because that is a big part of people having a real ownership in an endeavor, where it feels like there are things that I do in the community, and there are even spaces in the community where I may be with all people of color or all other Black people or whatever else. But even in those spaces, I don't have, in some cases, I might not have the same level of ownership. And part of that reason is that even when I'm able to be my full and authentic self, if people aren't actively or proactively interested in all I am and all I offer, then I'm really not connecting. So I can go and be comfortable and not have to code switch and all of those things. But if the people I'm working with don't care about me as a dad, they don't care about me, as navigating my workspace and being a husband and all of those things and really understanding the whole me, I don't have that same level of connection and investment as I do when I talk about the Latino Center of the Midlands. And that's something that each of us needs to think about if we're influencing a board, if we're working with a board or anything else. So when we do those things, as well as we try to be bold and honest in conversations that are usually uncomfortable, then that really makes it a place where people feel invested. If we're talking about being bold and talking about not just race, but racism, if we're bold in talking about the ways in which various public policies may have a negative impact on the things that we each are collectively passionate about, that's a better space than always having to tiptoe around race, racism, politics, all of those things, where we're able to frame it in the context of a shared passion. And each person is allowed to bring their full self, and we don't always agree. And we respectfully find spaces to disagree, but we never disagree on the shared humanity that we have. Because that's where things can go too far. If people say, well, we'll just agree to disagree, but the disagreement is about my humanity or your humanity. With our board, we always come in with that level of pure respect, love, and celebration of the humanity of each and every person on the board, as well as the people we serve in the community. And like I said, these things may seem simple, but these are real things that if you really take time to examine some spaces where you find yourself, they may not exist. And there may be some time needed for some introspection, for some real discernment to come up with how can you really make things better in that space.
Dr. Witt, so you're an African-American fella.
A fella, yeah.
Last time we both checked. What business do you have being on a Latino serving organization board? Why is that important?
When you think and you talk about the work, you think about the passion, the fact that we're not going to get things done if we don't tap into the people who have the passion, who have the connections. If you're thinking about the things that I bring to the table, there's things that I bring to the table that other people don't bring to the table. And it's not because of their racial or ethnic identity, it's because I'm Chris and they're not. So if you want the things that Chris brings, if you want the things that Aaron brings, you want the things that Dulce brings, then we also are going to bring our racial or ethnic identity. And the lived experiences that I have as a Black man in America can definitely be helpful to the work that we do at the Latino Center of the Midlands, as long as I'm able to think of that common and shared humanity, to think of justice, to think of what's right, and to think of the fact that we are really trying to transform systems and structure to be more fair, to be more just, then it's going to be easily applied to a Latino Center context. But it needs to be appreciated. Now, if I came into this space and every time I offered up an idea, I talked about a lived experience, somebody would say, well, that's nice, but you know, you're Black, and as a Black person, it looks different. I probably wouldn't be as invested. I probably wouldn't feel as comfortable. But the fact that if I talk about lived experience with discrimination or systemic racism, it may not be exactly the same for the Latino community, but it's not far off. And we're all smart enough and have enough intellect to figure out how it may be applied in this particular space. Additionally, there are ways in which I navigate Omaha and I see things through the lens of working at Creighton as a senior leader. I see things through the lens of being a Black person in a leadership role in Omaha or a person of color that then I can bring to the Latino Center to say, well, have we considered X, Y, Z? So I think I certainly have a home with the Latino Center, and I really think that it's a mutual appreciation, you know, the collective with me and me with the collective.
Absolutely, and I know that was an off-script question, and I appreciate your quick thinking, and that's right in line. And just to give everyone kind of some context on how Chris joined the board, you know, for some reason, two people introduced Chris and I on emails, and we scheduled lunch. I had no idea, I had no idea he was an African-American person, and didn't cross my mind to, it was a non thing. We had lunch. I think we had sushi or Vietnamese or something. And 5 minutes into the conversation, I was like, wow, this guy needs to be on our board. And it's exactly for the things that Chris mentioned. It's the whole body of stuff. Being African-American was one of those little things that was of interest to the Latino Center, but his background with diversity and inclusion, being outside of Omaha and coming into the city and taking an assessment of the landscape and being able to offer fresh perspective. Again, not being in Omaha and then being able to look at what he has brought from Baltimore and from Milwaukee and from Minnesota, and then bringing that to Omaha. And then the richness of his experience within the African-American community, having experience with the Urban League and NAACP and all of these other community groups that are very much grassroots. The African-American community has a tremendous way to mobilize and to bring people together and to pursue issues of importance. So for us to be able to bring that into the organization, that mindset and that experience offers so much value. So I just want to give you some context of, putting, what Chris just offered, even before that. And it was love at first talk for Chris. And I couldn't be any happier that he ended up, accepting the position on the board. He is a big deal. He was fairly new in a high position, and he could have served on many boards. And he chose us, which was incredibly generous of him. So thank you so much, Dr. Witt. You the man.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
So I guess moving the conversation on, we have seen some questions around tokenism in the message boards. Several people had mentioned, and I know that's on our list of topics to discuss. So, just to discuss the idea of tokenism, how do you manage the reality of, I want to diversify my board, but I don't want to just appoint, a token Asian, African-American, Latino, LGBTQ, it can't be as simple as, I'm going to find the first Hispanic person and see if they're interested in joining our board. There's a lot that goes into that. So if we can maybe go back to Dulce to talk a little bit about tokenism and, you know, kind of what are some of your thoughts on that?
So I think it's really important that as you go and search to be part of a board, that that you really start asking questions about what that board looks like. And I can think of my past earlier experiences where I didn't do that, and then I found myself part of a board that I was typically the only person of color on that board. I think the other thing too is to really think about whether you're truly going to be a voice. You may be asked to be at a board table, but if you have no voice and they're not listening to what you have to say or what you had to add from the perspective or the lens of your culture, then that's another sign for you to think about as to, is this really a board that I really want to be a part of? I think the biggest thing when it comes to tokenism is also too, is the ability, I mean, and this is what we're going through as a board, and many of the boards that I serve on, is really asking ourselves, are we diverse? Are we there yet? And not being ashamed to say, yeah, we've got a problem. We gotta intentionally be inclusive with other communities. But like Albert says, not to just say, oh, hey, the first brown or black person, I'm going to add them to the board. How are you building those relationships with the community? Because to me, anytime that I refer someone to the Latino Center, that's my reputation on the line. I want to make sure they're in for a long haul, and that they really care about the community. Because our cultures are very much about building relationships in the community. And it's not just to say, hey, I work with Albert and said and done. I really want to know how Albert is doing. If something happens to him, I'm going to be the type of person that really cares. And same with Chris or Aaron, I really care about what happens to them beyond serving as the board, and also really care about what's happening in the community. So make sure that if you're going to be part of a board, that it's something that you really care about, and that the board is also going to be the same to you and caring about who you are as an individual.
One quick thing to add to that, I hope everybody paid attention to what Dulce said earlier about, you know, being your full and authentic self, and I elaborated on it, but also listening to what Albert was saying about my membership on the board, because Albert and the rest of the board, they see me as the whole me. And that's what, if you're looking to diversify your board, make sure that you're seeing people as their whole selves, and that you're transparent enough to explain to people that you see and value them as their whole self. Not just to say, it's one thing to be transparent and say, we really need a new black or brown person on the board. That's halfway there, but you really need to lead with all of the talents that people have, what they bring, and the fact that you also value the diversity they bring, that their lived experience is in addition to all of the other things that they bring. And that's one of the ways that you avoid tokenism. Because if you bring a person onto a board and they're there and you never acknowledge or own up to the fact that they're bringing what they bring with diversity, but when they're not in the room, you tell people, well, we have a diversity person on the board and they're a person of color. That's tokenism. If you bring a person onto the board and the only value you have is now you have a person with a brown face in your group pictures, but you don't listen to them, as Dulce was saying, that's tokenism. So you can have tokenism going either way. The way that you resolve that issue is by looking at the person as a full human being who brings all these elements, including their various intersecting identities, and you actually verbalize it and you're transparent about all they bring. That it may not be comfortable, but that's the way you overcome tokenism.
Awesome. And, you know, kind of on that same vein of tokenism, we discussed something that I had never heard of before, which was the idea of going from going beyond an ally and becoming an accomplice in this work around diversity and inclusion. And it was a brand new word to me, and we had a rich discussion around it. And I want to see if Erin would be able to share some of her insights on the process of going from ally to accomplice?
Yeah, so I have the privilege of being on the board for the LCM, and being, I guess, a unique experience for me as a white person, being one of only 2 white people in the room. Typically speaking, a lot of rooms that I'm in the majority, but at the LCM, I'm in the minority. And I think as a person coming into that space who is white, number one, I come from a place of learning and humility. So I have to understand, to Chris's point, that I'm learning from the life experiences of the people that I'm both working with on the board and the people that I'm serving as a member of that board. So it's critical for me to come into that room and into that space, and be willing to listen to and better understand the other people's experiences who are in that room with me, and acknowledge that those experiences are different. And not only are they different, but they inform the way that we interact with each other, and the way that we perform together as a board, and the way that we engage. And so just coming with a lot of humility and a lot of intention of listening and learning. The other aspect of that too is that, being a member of the LCM board and moving from this sort of like idea of being an ally into an accomplice, is that I'm not there as a resume booster, as was mentioned previously. I'm there because I'm very passionate about bettering the community. And so being able to be in that room and be a part of those discussions, and really engaging with the programs that the LCM is putting together and helping in the community, that is important, because that moves me from just saying I want to do something to actually being a part of the community and understanding the community, and then being able to serve the community in a more effective way. So I think, when you're going into those situations, as a white person, it's just been incredibly informative for me to sit back and listen. Obviously, I bring a skill set to the table because I'm there because I'm a communications expert, and that's the talent that I bring. But I'm also there as an accomplice in making the community better. And in order to do that, as Chris said, I need to acknowledge that everybody in that room has different life experiences, and the majority of the people in that room's life experiences are different than mine, because they have been impacted differently by the way that American society and systems have treated them. So it's just, I think it's critical to, if you're a white person going into a board, to really be willing to listen to understand, listen to learn, and recognize that sometimes it's not you who needs to be speaking, but you who needs to be listening. And that is definitely a benefit to me of being on this board. And like Dulce and Chris have both said, I think that's part of the reason why we work so well together, is because we all come in with that mentality. And I think that's part of what's made us so successful in working together.
Thank you, Erin. And again, kind of just like I dropped how Chris joined the board, or jumped onto the board. I'll share a little bit about how Erin joined the board, just so that we can, kind of explore that process, because it's completely different than Chris, where Dr. Witt was recommended to me as a director, as executive director of the Latino Center, and as a community leader, because of his position and being new in town, and trying to stack his deck with being connected with all of the city leaders, with so he fell out of the sky, and it was a blessing. And I recognized that opportunity, like I said, within minutes of talking, and the chemistry and his ideas. Within minutes, I was like, all right, he needs to be on the board on our strategic plan. We have a bullet point that says something about diversity and inclusion. So I'm like, perfect. That's the avenue for him. With Erin, it was a very different process. We did what Dulce, I think we'll talk a little bit more in depth about, the skills matrix, to look at our board, where are our deficits, and the agency had a distinct deficit in marketing and communications. So I did not go to Aaron and say, hey, Aaron, you want to be on our board? I didn't know Aaron. I didn't have the pleasure yet. I talked to my friend who happened to be Hispanic, and I was like, yo, we need a communications person. Do you have anybody in mind? And he marinated on it, and a week later, he's like, hey, talk to this person. So he did an online introduction. Aaron and I met, and again, it was very, I don't know, it just felt very natural early and into the conversation, you know, when we're like skill sets and this is what we need. We didn't talk about diversity. We didn't talk about inclusion. We didn't talk about, you know, any of that stuff. We talked about, this is what our website infrastructure looks like. This is what this looks like. This is what this looks like. And we need to fix, you know, we need some high level thinking to help us address and plan for this. So that ended up being a perfect fit based on skills that also brought diversity of perspective to our board because of her background.
Yeah,
So
and Albert, I would
yeah.
add to that too. So like coming in as a communications person, it's that whole listening component has been critical to especially my serving the board, because there's been times where we've wanted to communicate something to different audiences, and you've asked me to kind of help you craft that message or hone that message. And unless I fully understand the audience to whom we're speaking, which typically is a different audience than myself, with a different cultural and life experience than myself, if I don't fully understand that because I've only been serving on the board to pad my resume and just be in the room, then I'm not going to fully serve that community. So a huge element of my kind of growing into this role has really been listening and learning from everybody that I'm talking to related to the LCM to best understand how to communicate effectively with the various audiences who we're talking to. And so, I mean, I think, you know, listening and learning is important in the boardroom that we're in together as a group, but it's also been really critical for me as a board member to serve the very organization that of the board that I'm serving on. And so that's where I think it's been helpful for me as an individual to just be in a mode of listening and learning for, you know, the duration of my service.
If we can, so let's go through the lifespan. We were intentional about looking for skills that were necessary for the board. We were thoughtful in trying to add diversity. And this is open to any of the three of you, what are your thoughts on retaining talent? Once they're there, once, and I know we've touched on it a little bit, but if we can talk about it just from a perspective, a practical standpoint, what are the things that will retain board members for longevity? How do we do it?
I think, Albert, it's what everyone has said, is allowing that person to really be their authentic self on the board and leveraging the talents that they're bringing to the board. So for example, you know, Erin, going back to Erin and her marketing background, giving her the ability to provide input or the ability to help with a message, and leveraging her talents and allowing her to give us her perspective on the board is really important. What I love about our board is that even though we're a board, we still have the capability to have relationships outside the board. We have gatherings, or someone's going through, like Chris, when he had his new addition to his family, we all, you know, congratulated him on the birth of his child. It's things like that that really matter to people, that you're just not there for an hour to go through business outcomes. We really care as a board about the community and about the people that serve on the board.
To address one of the questions that came up in the chat that would really go along these lines is this idea that, you know, you're going to have times where people are burned out. You know, they're burned out from either being on the board or burned out from life, from jobs, whatever. And when you fully start to get to know or have an interest in them as a human being, I mean, as time goes on, you're going to hopefully increase and really build up that relationship, but being there for people. As Dulce alluded to, you know, being able to check in, being able to give people some space. You know, maybe somebody just is so, I mean, a few months ago, we had like a board meeting where I was able to chime in on the video chat for like 5 minutes. And I had like both my boys climbing on me and everything. And I was just like, look, y'all, I just want to let you know that, you know, I wish I could stay, but I just can't. There's too much going on. And the kids are saying hi and stuff. And everybody's like, we totally got it. It's all good. It wasn't like, oh, well, you know, he's derelict in his duties. It's horrible. It was just like, hey, they get it, you know, and that's the type of thing that I was comfortable enough to do that I'm with my kids and I'm like, well, let me go ahead and chime in. Those are the types of things that make you feel fed by being part of a community or a group versus feeling so disconnected that you don't even let people know you're not going to be there, or you simply send a cold message because you know you're going to get a cold message back. Versus when I chimed in, everybody was happy to see the kids and they're like, oh, we sorry you can't stay, but we got you, buddy. We'll see you next time. That's the type of thing that leads to some retention, that leads to people really investing more and more as time goes on versus keeping it so sterile that, you know, you feel like, well, if I didn't go to any more board meetings, I might not even hear from them. I would just get like a postcard that says you've been replaced, you know, so that's a difference.
Yeah. Aaron, anything to add to retention? Why didn't you run away after the first board meeting 3 years ago?
Well, you know, I didn't, but I thought about it. No, I'm just kidding. It was great. I think it's so true what Chris and Dulce have both said about that we, as a board, we see each other in our full humanity. We understand that the board is not like this robotic thing that we just go through the motions and do every month. We've had really robust conversations in our board meetings. And I mean, there are times where people get really passionate about things. And I think sometimes when people get passionate, that can be taken as like, you know, oh, we're getting into like some sort of disagreement or argument or conflict. But when those conversations happen and they're difficult, nobody in that room is over talking other people. Nobody in that room is trying to dominate the conversation. There is always a sense that everybody, there's a very democratic sense in our board. And I think, you know, that's a huge component of everyone feeling like they can bring their full authentic selves to the table because everybody's perspective and opinions are valued equally. And that's not just something that we say. Those conversations drive real change within the organization. And if we didn't have that diverse perspective, then I don't think the organization would be on the strong path that, I mean, it would probably still be great because you'd be there, Albert. But I think the board's ability to really have difficult conversations, navigate those conversations in a respectful but very robust way, it's fulfilling on so many levels. And so for me, that's a huge component of why I stay, because we have these really, really engaging conversations that not only are important for us as humans to have with each other, but also that drive a lot of really meaningful change within the organization and the community itself. And I think the other thing that's really struck me about this board is that there are times where we have an agenda of items that we want to talk about. But if there's something that's really important and the conversation is lending itself to, you know, really, really digging into this particular topic, we don't shy away from doing that. We are willing and able to go to very deep conversations and challenging conversations with each other if a particular topic or issue really warrants that. And so I think it's just the level of collaboration and openness within the group is really critical to the success of the organization itself and the board, and a lot of the reason why I continue to just stay. And as Dulce said, actually look forward to those meetings every month.
And one additional thing, I think we also, probably not for all of us, because we have a member or two who are retired and stuff, so they're doing it purely out of love, but a lot of us who also are fully engaged in our careers, it's also a space where we're getting some insights, some ideas. You know, I'm watching a way that Aaron may talk about a communications issue that's purely LCM related, but then the next week I'm in a meeting with our communications and marketing people, and I can use a turn of phrase that I learned from Aaron, or I see something that Dulce brings when it comes to HR. Now I'm in a meeting with Creighton's HR department. I'm able to sound extra smart because I'm stealing something from her. I mean, so I think that in addition to some of the, warm and fuzzy things that we talked about, there are also, there are real takeaways when you're in a space where everybody feels that they can really contribute. If it was a space where we felt there was a real hierarchy and there were only a few people who could speak and the rest of us were just there to fill slots or for diversity on a picture or whatever else it would be, then we wouldn't have as robust of conversations. We wouldn't have moments of passion and disagreement where you can see what somebody's truly passionate about and say, you know what, I need to adopt some of that passion when I'm trying to get things done in other spaces. So I think that that's something that really makes me want to also stay there, is that you guys don't always know it, but I'm stealing little tidbits here and there from each of you, putting it into my portfolio. So.
And we're doing the same thing with you. Every time you're dropping knowledge, we're listening. If you have questions, please put them on. I know we're kind of going through these, and we have about 10 minutes left. Is that correct, Linda? Okay. So please drop your questions. I have one more question that I want to direct at Dr. Witt, and then we'll jump into some of these questions. And Dr. Witt, we had talked about spheres of influence in kind of checking ourselves. We want to be more open. We want to be more diverse. We want to attract more diverse talents and more of that energy into our lives and our work. But then we look at our spheres of influence, the people that we surround ourselves with. I guess if you can kind of speak to how that influences how we see the world, how we experience the world.
Yeah, I mean, we have to remember that as individuals, we have spheres of influence. Our organizations have spheres of influence, but also we are influenced by spheres that we navigate. And we really need to think about those two-way relationships and what that may mean for the ways that we would fill a board, or we would staff, the actual staff of the agency that the board serves, or whatever it would be. Because sometimes when we don't really try to be as intentional as we could be about how we are influenced and where we can influence, then we're not really being as completely dedicated to diversity and inclusion as we could be. And one of the ways that I know in our kind of pre-conference conversations that the four of us had, that we really got to thinking about making sure that we had some conversation about spheres of influence, kind of goes back to this idea of moving from being non to anti. A lot of times you'll hear it talked about in terms of being non-racist to them being anti-racist, but it can be applied in the context of sexism and the context of many isms. Elements of exclusion or marginalization. And when you go from non, where as an organization or as individuals, you say, well, we're not going to say these words. We're not going to uphold, whatever this hateful person is or whatever else, but you really don't do anything to try to transform the structures of your group or your organization. And you don't look at the spheres of influence that each individual on a board has or the organization has itself to say, well, within those spaces of influence, we're going to work to make some push for transformation. So we can move from being non to anti, to really say we're going to put some skin in the game to be that accomplice that Aaron talked about. If you're not willing to put that effort in, then you're probably not going to have people who really want to be engaged, and you're not making the most of those spheres of influence. So that's something that each of these organizations needs to think about. Do you really think that me as a Black man wants to be on a board where they're like, well, we're going to have a stance of neutrality when it comes to anti-Blackness in the United States of America, or when it comes to systemic racism, we'll wait to talk about that another time. Because this just isn't the moment. I mean, if that's the conversation that comes up, that's the conversation that needs to be had, because as a person of conscience, I need to know who I'm surrounding myself with. How is that influence being used? And that's something that I think for each of these boards that folks on the call are asking questions about or thinking about, really think about when it comes to, like I said, any of the isms. Where do you as individuals, where do the individuals on the board, and where does the organization as a whole really stand on engaging as anti against these negatives versus being neutral and allowing them to perpetuate from generation to generation.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, so rapid fire. I'm going to go through some of these questions. A super easy one from Donna of how often does the LCM board meet? We meet monthly. We meet the last Tuesday of every month we schedule it for 90 minutes. We try to get out in 60, if not sooner. In what ways do we maintain strong relationships and communications with board members? And that there was a couple folks that chimed in on that one. Madam Chair, can you answer that one? How do we maintain good relationships amongst the board and leadership team?
So I have been doing one-on-ones with the board members just to get their take on how they feel the direction of the board is going and what we need to do to continue improving the board. Albert said we meet monthly. Apart from the monthly meetings, we talk outside those meetings. And we look forward to talking to each other. I meet with Albert weekly to talk about what's going on in the center. At the end of the year, the last month, we kind of save that month for a time for us to gather and celebrate our successes. I think the most important thing is that we treat each other with respect and we really care about each other, and we're very passionate about what we believe the center can do. I mean, I don't know, Albert, if you mentioned this, but I really believe through Albert's leadership and the combined expertise of the board, it's enabled the board to go from a very small organization to grow into a larger organization, and some of the outcomes of people that we're servicing has increased, and that couldn't be possible unless we were able to really create that environment among our board that we gel so well together.
Yeah, thank you, Dulce. Another question that I love this question by Mars, Nevada. How are we making sure we're fostering young people to lead in the future, either in boards or orgs, cooperation leadership? We have some leadership development programs within our youth programming. But one of the things that we added a couple of years ago related to this topic about increasing diversity of boards is, as an agency, we support staff members to take time out of their day to serve on boards, and we encourage that. We also provide staff members with the costs of, I guess, doing business, if you will. So if you're on a board, there's usually expectations, some kind of financial, buying a table or a chair or a seat for an event. And the Latino Center, with the board of directors, commitment, we have fostered that environment where we tell staff members, you want to gain leadership experience. You may not be a supervisor right now in the role that you're in at the center, but if you find an advisory group, a board, a committee to contribute to, that can build your resume, that can build your capacity, that can give you some of those benefits. So as an agency, we champion that. And to give you an anecdote, we went from 0 staff members outside of me serving on boards to now we have 4 serving on boards. And one staff member just ended up joining a board with a board member from a major foundation, which is, it's exciting, and it's his first board. So that's kind of the strategy that we're taking as an agency to build the capacity, and younger people. We're a very young organization. Our staff members, we employ quite a bit of fresh out of college people, and we really try to ingrain that into their psyche. So I think we're probably done with time. I don't want to get into more questions to go over. We appreciate everybody's support. I'll let Madam Chair close us out.
Again, we would like to thank you today for joining our session. We are going to be huge in advocating that you enrich your board with shades of color, because we feel that it adds value from the perspective of perspectives and what each person brings from skills, from the sector. It helps build your bench for the future. We talked a little bit about the matrix that we currently use. That is a handout from today's session, where we really think about who we want to be part of our board. And probably the biggest thing to think about is, if you join a board or a part of a board, is that board resonating with what you love to do? Is it speaking to the passion, and it is allowing you to be your true authentic self? Again, thank you for attending today's session, and I want to thank Albert Varas, our leader, Aaron and Chris for joining us in the panel today. Thank you.
Thank you, speakers. I just have a couple things to mention. The board matrix that Dulce just talked about is in your Whova app, so you can just go to documents and find that there. There will be a final bonus session after we're done here. That space is going to be open for you to engage, message, whatever. Hopefully you've all downloaded Whova so you can have access to that. I'm looking forward to seeing people tomorrow, because this is just day one. So again, thank you all. For all of us who serve on boards, we appreciate the time and energy and the camaraderie that you have modeled today. So thank you all. Thanks everyone for being here.